And how do we compare with other parts of Europe in terms of our treatment of children or the way we deal with coronavirus in schools at the moment?
I mean, it seems that we are lagging behind. I think most of Europe is now back to normal. I guess the one thing I would say, to be fair, is that's obviously not the case in the States. So, you know, in the States, there's, I think, still quite upsetting situations going on, at least in some states. And I think it's very, really interesting worldwide to look at how differently, you know, countries have dealt with this, and how children seem to have become almost like political footballs, more so in some countries than others. But I think overall, if you look at the pattern, it does seem that worldwide we have not treated children well. And in fact, one of the things we are continually told is, oh, but you know, they're doing it in France or Germany or wherever it is, and you're like, but that doesn't make it okay. That just makes it even more wrong. You know, you don't follow blindly without thinking whether it is the right thing to do.
So you'll continue despite the challenges and all the things that, you know, there's still work to do. You're still getting stuff in your inbox. You've no intention of going anywhere.
We will definitely continue. I mean, I'd be lying if I said there weren't days when it just seems all very, very thankless and hard. But actually, I think, you know, we've seen during the pandemic that this fault line open, and children have just fallen through the fault line. And there aren't enough people advocating effectively, I think, for children. So you think, well, you kind of have to. I think the one thing I'd say is, you know, assuming we do continue, we have to put it on a more positive footing. So it's all very depressing, fighting what's happening, because of course it's almost like you're fighting degrees of backwards. And I think what UsForThem would really like to do is start moving it onto a more forward-looking and positive agenda. There's so many wonderful things we could do for children in this country, but while we are mired in coronavirus, which isn't really about children at all, it's very hard.
Let me pick you up on that, because I think some of the people who have been sort of arguing for more restrictions in schools and more measures on children do argue that, you know, there is long COVID. There's children who are affected by the disease, and you know that it does impact them. I mean, maybe a few words on what you think about that, because you know there's different figures, aren't there, on long COVID and children, but I think the best data shows that it's not really, most get over it. I think that's right, isn't it?
I believe that's right, and certainly there's a large King's College study, I think, which shows that. But I think, you know, I think the problem with these studies is people can quote different facts and figures to see their argument. I mean, I suppose what we would say is long COVID, thankfully, is not a huge issue for the vast majority of children. I don't think that's in dispute. And, you know, of course, we don't want to minimize it for those children who it does severely impact, and there are some. And, you know, one hopes that there would be a balance to strike here. Personally, I don't think imposing, and it goes back to the point we talked about at the beginning, but I don't think imposing indiscriminate measures on all children is the right way to deal with a virus that, you know, affects a small proportion badly, particularly not if it's going to be going on for this long. I mean, it is not viable to have this level of disruption for much longer, or any longer, frankly, in our school system. We're not going to have a school system if this continues. So we have to start prioritizing the vast majority of children who just need stability and normalcy.
Yeah, because the mental health effects and the educational effects and the long-term effects are actually huge, as we've seen.
Well, and I think this is right. And it's, you know, it's a really good point. Like we haven't measured the costs of these measures. And actually, you know, without wanting to minimize long COVID, which is definitely a thing, but, you know, so too are all these other costs. And there will come a point, if it hasn't already come, when actually those costs far outweigh, you know, the costs of COVID.
Yeah, on all society. So, what next? You talked about wanting to be more positive. Maybe just touch on a few of those ideas about how you want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that we would like to do is actually to look at what went wrong and figure out how that doesn't happen again. I think, my view is there are some deep structural changes needed to the constitutional and policy-making ecosystem to ensure that actually children aren't disregarded like this in the same way. I think, one thing that hopefully everyone can agree on that this has thrown up is schools do need better funding. It would be great to start to use our platform to advocate for that. Let's put schooling and school funding on the same kind of long-term secure settlement as we see, for example, the NHS. And I think the other thing that we have seen is that there are a segment of children, like I said, who have been so severely penalised by COVID that it would be really nice, I think, for society and certainly for us for them to start thinking about actually how we can better look after our most vulnerable children. I mean, we've heard so much about vulnerable adults during the pandemic. We have heard so little about vulnerable children. I know it's something you've written about, Lucy, and we hear a lot of it, and some of the things we hear are awful. There are therapies and services that have been withdrawn from children who are desperately in need, whether that's because they're SEND children or disabled children or for some other reason, and these services have still not been restored, and in some cases these children have missed critical development windows. So I think that's something we would really like to try and do what we've done really with other children, which is to shine a light on what's happening so that at least it raises awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw a tweet by Carl Hennigan from Oxford University saying we're spending about, I think, nearly over £300 per person per year on testing. And you just think, well, what could that do instead? Something like this huge, I think Operation Moonshot was £100 billion. So, fine to have that. But then what else could you use the money for to better spend it? We could have more teachers, more TAs.
Well, you could probably have a teacher per pupil, maybe. But, I just think that's exactly it. And I think,
priorities.
Priorities.
And prioritizing spending. So just my last question, but what keeps you up at night? What worries you when in your darker moments? What do you fear?
I mean, I think there have been some really dark moments in this, and I think feeling actually that nothing is going to change and that it's all really quite hopeless. I mean, I'd never really realized, I guess, because I've been lucky enough not to have to get involved in politics, but I'd never really realized how broken the system was for children and how easily actually they could, as a cohort, just fall through the cracks.
What do you mean by that? Broken system for children because there's not enough people speaking up for them, no one representing them.
Yeah, and I think at every level. So, it seems to me that there hasn't been advocacy from, with a few exceptions, and there are a few notable exceptions of politicians who really do fight for children. And certainly actually one thing I think we saw through the pandemic was the Children's Commissioner became more and more vocal. So it's not right to say there's no one, but I think for whatever reason, the warnings that certainly Anne Longfield was putting out towards the end of her tenure were not taken into consideration. And I think personally, I find that very worrying that you can have things being said by a Children's Commissioner that policymakers are able to disregard. I think the real darkness has come for me from seeing how easily arguments can be twisted on their head. There's this notion that if you are somehow defending children, and I guess to an extent arguing more generally against lockdown, which is something else for them have tried not to do, but invariably it is linked, you are somehow a selfish person, you don't care about others. And I find that troubles me actually, because you might not agree with what we've done, but it has always been done from a place of caring about children, and it is because we care about them and have thought they've been very subrogated actually to other interests that we've done this. So I guess, what keeps me up, I guess maybe thinking, how on earth do you turn this narrative around? And I think we saw last week the report on the learnings from lockdown, which was, I thought, incredible, absolutely incredible in what it didn't say.
Just talk me through that. I saw a bit about it, but what it didn't say, what in terms of children.
So, I think this report mentioned children the inquiry last week. And it was supposedly a learnings from lockdown, and it mentioned children 3 times, education barely at all. And I thought, how can you have a report that talks about this without talking about the damage we've done to children? And I think there are many people who are so, I don't know if complicit is the right word, but are so involved now in what has happened. There is going to be pressure to whitewash what happened. And that worries me, because if we're not honest about what happened and the harm we caused, we're never going to learn from it. So I think, to the extent I feel there is real darkness, it is in that.
I mean, do you feel there's been some censorship of, by big tech of what you're trying to do and say? Have you been suppressed in any other way? Or
I'm sure we have, and I think, I suspect we've been directly censored. We see that sometimes. I think we've had articles, particularly on things like masks, presumably some of the vaccine stuff as well. I understand it's controversial, but I'd have thought we have been censored.
I think
directly.
YouTube's taken down a million things. David Davis, the MP, had a debate on vaccine passports, and that was taken down by YouTube. It's a kind of bit, again, another sort of Wild West, picking and choosing what to take down and what shouldn't.
Well, and we try and only use, mainstream reputable sources. So whenever we see something taken down, it's quite surprising, particularly when that's in a, mainstream newspaper, but, so be it. And I think the other thing about the censorship is actually self-censorship. So I think, we've heard throughout the last 18 months about this notion of a silent majority. I really wish they'd speak up. And, I think there's a lot of people who feel increasingly alarmed, actually, by what's happened. And, the number of private messages we've had from, in some cases, very respected people, and people it would have been great to have been able to count and point to their public support. And, these messages invariably thank us for what we're doing and applaud us for it, and then go on to say, of course, I can't say that publicly. And you think this back to where we started, really, but this idea that people are having to self-censor because it's become so politically controversial, I think is a very damaging place for a society to be in.
But and hopefully things are, as we become less angry and as society opens up, maybe it will be less polarized. Maybe people will come together a bit more. I don't know. That is the only hope, isn't it?
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I hope so. And I hope it becomes easier as you're looking towards, forward things. But I
was just going to say, I wanted to just get that back on record because I didn't say it properly, but so we can get it as a clip. But it was the Royal College of Paediatricians and Child Health. So the Royal College of Paediatricians and Child Health came out today and argued for an end to mass testing in schools. That's right, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. They did. And, I think that's fantastic to hear them say that, because I think if we could get rid of mass testing in schools, we would knock out a vast majority of the disruption, and it would be a really, really fitting thing to do for children at this point.